Emily saw it. You were at a restaurant bar planning a trip with another woman. Oh, I see. And so what? Even when caught cheating, my husband Donald wouldn't drop his defiant attitude. In a moment, what we had built over 15 years crumbled away. In this day and age, I was a full-time homemaker, living with his parents just like every other year. I had given up the job I loved at a publishing company where I felt fulfilled, and now I spent half of the week accompanying my parents to the hospital and adjusting meals according to everyone's schedule. I was living the life much like a housemaid. After getting married, I had no time for myself. The only place I could relax was in our bedroom, even in this spacious house. Despite all this, I had chosen this life because I wanted to be with my husband. The option of leaving never crossed my mind, so when my adulterous husband said, "We can get a divorce, I was at a loss for words, feeling more amazed than angry. This is the story of me, Sophie Johnson, turning 40 this year, leaving my husband Donald after 15 years of marriage, and starting my life from scratch. It all began 2 months ago on the 25th. That day was payday for Donald, who worked at an electronics manufacturer. Usually, his salary would be deposited into our joint account. I would use that money to pay our monthly bills and give him an allowance in the evening. However, 2 months ago, his salary wasn't deposited into our joint account. I thought there must have been some technical glitch, so when he got home in the evening, I asked him about it. "What do you mean you changed the deposit account without saying anything to me?" He had switched the account to his personal one. "But what about our payments? These bills are due on the 27th. I couldn't keep up with a sudden change and just thought of immediate concern. "Just let me know how much you need, and I'll transfer that amount into the joint account," he said, taking off his suit with his back turned to me. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes. "So why did you change it?" I couldn't think of any reason. In the 15 years we've been together, we had never changed the account. We were saving in our joint account, so it wouldn't be a problem if his transfer was late. It's not that our bills would fall behind. Maybe I didn't need to press the issue, but I couldn't help wondering, why didn't he trust me with our finances? Did I do something wrong? I didn't remember overspending, but I thought maybe I had unknowingly upset him. If so, I needed to apologize. That's what I thought when I asked him. But it seems like he thought I was blaming him. He threw his freshly removed shirt onto the couch and glared at me. "It's my hard-earned money, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. But why do I need your permission to use it?" I couldn't understand any of his words. I'd been giving him a $500 allowance every month, but that was just a temporary arrangement. If his expenses piled up, I would give him more. I asked him what he spent his money on, but I'd never refused to give him more when he needed it. As a stay-at-home wife, there have been times when I asked if I could buy something I wanted, but the reverse never happened. "I don't need dinner today." "What?" "But I already prepared." "Never mind, I'll eat out." He got bent out of shape, grabbed his car keys, and went out again. He seemed strange. For the past 15 years, we've never had issues over money. But suddenly, he starts saying it's his money, while cleaning up the food I had prepared. I was upset at my husband's selfish actions. I was frustrated that despite having food at home, he chose to eat out anyway because now he was in charge of the finances. From that moment, he began eating out every night and coming home late at night after I fell asleep. Also, the number of days he told me he was staying at work overnight increased. The fight had completely escalated. Even when we were together, we didn't talk more than necessary. As time passed, it was hard to find a chance to make up, and I started blaming myself. We'd never had a fight last this long before. It was a minor issue that he changed the bank account without consulting me. If he wants to manage the finances, that's fine. After about 2 weeks of awkwardness, I began to reconsider like that. Then one day, I received a message from Emily, who was my colleague when I worked at the publishing company. "Hey, how are you doing? How about lunch soon?" Emily's message was a welcome surprise. We used to go out for drinks after work and spend our days off together when we were single. Now, with families of our own, we didn't contact each other as much but still tried to meet at least once or twice a year. Her invitation came at a good time, and I agreed readily. 2 days later, in the afternoon, we were sitting in a cafe in the next town. "So they moved into the care facility, huh?" "Yeah, both of them in the same place." Emily asked how things were going, and I told her about my parents-in-law moving into a nursing home a few months ago. "I know I shouldn't say this, but it's a good thing. It must be a relief for you." She looked pleased, knowing how much I had been struggling to find time for myself. She seemed relieved now. Well, I do have to get their clothes, visit, and accompany them to their doctor's appointments, but still, my life has become a lot easier. This was the first time since I was single that I was able to casually make time to meet with a friend. You're such a dutiful daughter-in-law. Is Donald still hands-off? Yes, he seems to want to do nothing on his days off. He never wanted to go anywhere on his days off. In these 15 years, we've never even gone shopping together. Her husband is diligent. He picks her up in his car when it rains and sometimes even does the shopping for her. He never changed at all. Well, since I am a stay-at-home wife, he could at least take care of his own parents. Emily never thought highly of my husband. When we got married, we both had jobs, but he never helped with the household chores. On days when I was too tired to do housework, he found it unbelievable and suggested I become a stay-at-home wife. I didn't want to quit, but I resigned as he suggested, becoming a full-time homemaker. Soon after, I was asked to live with his parents, and I ended up taking care of them. The reason I couldn't talk back to my husband was because of the significant difference in our incomes. He is 8 years older than me, already held a position at his company, and his income was more than double mine. Can you earn as much as I do? If you can, I wouldn't mind quitting. He'd say things like that, leaving me speechless. I had discussed my true desire of not wanting to quit my job with Emily, even crying on the phone, overwhelmed by having no time for myself. I understand why she holds a negative view of him. It's because of my venting. After a while, the warm vegetable salad we ordered arrived. As she served it on smaller plates, she spoke again. So, how are things with him? Upon being asked, I thought for a while and nodded affirmatively. I had actually come to discuss our big fight, but I didn't want him to be seen in a worse light. Emily paused, holding the serving tongs, and stared at me as I managed only to nod and smile, trying not to arouse suspicion. She stopped serving the salad midway. I'm sorry I asked it in the wrong way. Sophie, things aren't going well with him, are they? Emily's words made it seem like she knew something. I was left flustered and unable to respond as she started talking about something that had happened a few days ago. She recounted being at a dining bar near her office for a work after party. While heading to the restroom, she passed a man in the aisle who turned out to be my husband. He didn't seem to recognize her, so she decided against calling out to him. But noticing that he was in casual clothes made her wonder if he was with me. After leaving the restroom, she decided to take a look at where he was seated. What she saw was him having drinks with a woman who wasn't me. It hit me instantly. He's cheating on you. They were sitting close together, bodies touching as they drank. Was that really my husband? I couldn't believe it. He hadn't come home that day due to working overtime, so there was no reason for him to be in casual clothes. Moreover, he seemed genuinely busy lately. Did he even have the time for cheating in his current state? Although we've been on bad terms recently, I couldn't imagine him resorting to cheating. I just don't see him as that kind of person. Sensing my thoughts, she sighed and added, for the upcoming long weekend, he mentioned going to a place in Malibu. He was showing information about the accommodations on his phone and mentioned something about a prime-grade steak dinner. You could probably find the hotel if you search from there. She started searching for the hotel on her phone, while at the cafe I was still hoping it was just her misunderstanding. However, as soon as I got home, I started looking through his clothes. I don't remember how many clothes he has, so I wouldn't know how many of what item were missing, but I did notice that 2 or 3 of his favorite clothes were missing. Until last year, he would immediately wear them after washing, and they were always at the front of the drawer when opened. But now, they were nowhere to be found, even after searching every corner, the back of the closet, and the drawers of rarely used cabinets, literally everywhere. The only thing that came to mind was him working overtime and even on weekends due to his busy schedule, telling me he had spent a night in the company's restroom because he missed the last train. As I stood in front of the closet, the sound of an incoming email came from my pocket. It was a message from Emily. The email included the URL of a hotel in Malibu. As I stood there in a daze, I slowly pressed the link and a stay plan with a dinner including prime-grade meat was displayed. I felt dizzy, like I was having a bad dream. There was a part of me that still wanted to believe in him. But not finding his favorite shirt was a huge blow. 2 days later, the Saturday before a long weekend, he was unusually at home, working with the TV on. I placed a cup of coffee near his computer and casually asked, I haven't seen you wearing your favorite t-shirt this year. Even though he hadn't taken his eyes off the display when I put down his drink, at this question, the sound of him typing on the keyboard suddenly stopped. Then he said, "Yeah, I'll wear it sometime. making a point of looking at me as he responded. That was unusual. For the past month since that payday, he had been distant, but now, when asked about his shirt, he was making eye contact. I looked for it but couldn't find it, I added, trying to gauge anything from his reaction. He replied, "Isn't it somewhere?" and then looked away, returning to his computer. His reaction made me feel suspicious. Despite mentioning his missing favorite shirt, he showed no signs of being troubled. Normally, in such situations, he would pretend to be troubled just to emphasize that I hadn't taken care of it properly, even if he didn't really need it. Last year, he kept complaining just because it hadn't dried due to the rain. Every change seemed suspicious when it came to him. I couldn't control myself. I had to keep digging until I got clear answers, even if it meant going too far. "You're off for a long weekend, right?" Even though we hadn't reconciled after our last fight, I couldn't help but ask something more intrusive. "Work from when?" "I don't know. There's a business trip. I might have a day off." Was this also a lie? It seemed like it. After all, for the past 15 years, he always took time off during the holidays. Emily's words crossed my mind. Going to Malibu, as she said, mentioned the prime grade steak. Of course, as she also said, the story I heard at the cafe started to feel real, and I felt a surge of anger welling up within me. Before I realized it, I had said it out loud. "Business trip? You mean you're going to Malibu?" Uttering a word that I hadn't asked about, he who had been looking at the screen froze. He slowly turned around, but his expression had changed from earlier. With a weary face, he squinted and glared at me. It was the exact same look he had during our fight on that payday. What the hell is going on? Really rummaging around our room pretending to look for clothes? He sighed heavily. Hearing his words, my lips quivered noticeably. Indeed, I had rummaged through the room, but I found nothing. I couldn't find the t-shirt. Yet despite that, he said it, rummaged through his room. He said so, which means if I had rummaged more, I would have found something that linked to Malibu. I still wanted to believe even while doubting. Emily says she saw it at the wine bar. You and another woman were planning a trip. The things we had built started to crumble away. Oh, is that so? I thought. At times like this, he would hardly make an excuse, but reality was different. He was not flustered at all. He turned away with a defiant look. So what's the point? I was even questioned in return. What does he want to hear? When I became speechless out of disbelief, he piled on words. Who do you think you are? I'm working hard to earn money, enough for a stay-at-home wife to live comfortably. He yelled at me loudly and my head started to ache. I placed a hand on my forehead and took a deep breath. I'm okay with getting a divorce, you know. He uttered those few words. For the past 15 years, no matter what happened, no matter how hard it was, I had tried not to think about it. I was disappointed that he could say it with no hesitation. From that day, he continued to ignore me. Even worse, the moment he found out I knew it, he boldly started communicating right in front of me, like, "All right, I'll pick you up at 7 in the morning." The first time it happened, I was dumbfounded. Was he always like this? The person in front of me was a total stranger. As the long weekend and the day of his trip approached, I found myself in the car driven by Emily, silently witnessing his infidelity unfold before my eyes. "Sophie, did you get a shot of him putting his arm around her waist just now?" "Yeah. You should take as many photos as you can." "Okay." When I recounted my conversation with him on Saturday to Emily, she was furious and urged me to break up with such a foolish man. She also suggested that I take photos as proof of his cheating and claim for emotional damages. She spent her much-anticipated weekend for this very purpose. But for those times, I wonder if I just wasted 15 years. If I knew it would turn out like this, I wouldn't have married. If I knew I would go through this, I would have divorced him a long time ago. I shouldn't have had to endure and try so hard. Today, seeing his smile for the first time in a while, I wanted to redo those 15 years, though I wanted to cry. I couldn't help but keep sighing. She had been quietly listening, but suddenly she started the car engine and checked the time. "What time is it now?" "After 3 o'clock. Then she made a call and smiled at me. "Hey Sophie, let's move out right now." "Ha! Hello, sorry to bother you during the long weekend. I appreciate your help." I was taken aback by her sudden proposal. She seemed determined to start something. Panicked, I shook my head at her while she was on the phone. But she ignored me and continued, saying, "It's all good." From that moment, Emily was full of energy. While driving, she used her car's navigation system to call various places and gather people to come to my house. About 3 hours later, we actually arrived home in the evening. About 2 hours after that, but within just 1 hour, all my belongings in the house were packed into cardboard boxes. It was truly unbelievable. I didn't want to talk about work since you didn't want to quit, Sophie, but I've transferred from a fashion magazine and now I'm the editor-in-chief of a local magazine. In the car, she made various calls to the moving company, real estate agency, and even to a lawyer who knows Donald. She expertly adjusted the schedule so that the Certus people's visiting times did not clash. I followed her instructions meticulously. Minute by minute, I packed only my valuables into a box, leaving the rest to be handled by the movers. The real estate agent introduced me to a house that could be moved into within a few days. Meanwhile, my belongings were sent to her house, and I ended up staying with her for a few days. After the truck packed with my things left, I was visited by a lawyer who provided advice on claiming alimony after divorce, guiding me towards the least burdensome method. I was amazed at how much could be accomplished in just a few hours. I knew she was a very proactive person from our time working together, but her efficiency was truly remarkable. However, as I looked around the now half-empty room, anxiety slowly began to creep in. He's definitely going to be mad. The cost of moving was surprisingly low. The studio apartment was affordable, and even the consultation with the lawyer was free, yet it still required money. I made these decisions without consulting him. I'm sure he'll be furious when he gets back from his trip. As I felt our relationship deteriorating rapidly, I became depressed. Then she slapped my back. Hey, being a homemaker is a respectable job too. The money you've saved from being frugal is also yours. Plus, it's his fault. He said he'd transfer the necessary money, right? So let's have him pay even for the cost of living on your own. After being strongly persuaded by her, I took one last look around the house. I remembered how in the early days I had found it difficult to rearrange things. Now, I realized I had placed my toner on the bathroom vanity without hesitation. The shoe rack was filled with my shoes. I had always seen myself as a maid, but maybe I had actually become part of the family. After imprinting the image of the home I had lived in for 15 years in my mind, I made up my mind and nodded vigorously at her. Then, on the last day of the long weekend, I left the house I had shared with him. I was still staying at Emily's place. "Where are you at?" I picked up the call from him with a trembling hand. He asked that with a grumpy voice. Without answering his question, I said the words Emily and I had decided on beforehand. "You said you were okay with a divorce, right? And that you would transfer the necessary money. I am divorcing you. Please provide for the costs of me living alone." "What? Stop talking nonsense and come back." He seemed to think this was just a runaway. I cut off his voice and spoke my final words. "Please have your new partner take care of your parents from now on. Thank you for 15 years. While he was still talking, I hung up. He called back several times, but I didn't pick up. I did feel guilty about how I ended things unilaterally like this, but looking back, I had always accepted his unilateral demands ever since we got married. So I tried to think it is fine, at least in the last moment. The following year was a whirlwind. I negotiated with him through a lawyer and finally secured a divorce with alimony and living expenses assured. Finding peace of mind was a struggle until I landed a job as an office clerk at a local factory, slowly building my life with my monthly salary. "Sophie, can you make the deadline this month?" "Yeah, I'll make it, but I think I'm going to barely make it by the deadline, so I don't have time to chat on the phone." All right, I'll go now. You have your piece this month too." 6 months ago, Emily, who manages our local magazine, added a new section about saving money, and as a frugal person, I've been given a chance to write a couple of pages there every month. I gave up on my dream to work in a publishing company. Her arrangements mean a lot to me. Now I'm a writer, but I have 15 years of experience in budgeting as a homemaker, and I want to share my experiences wholeheartedly. I was able to make a fresh start. Then an unexpected call came in. "It's good to hear your voice." "Sounds well." "Mother-in-law?" My mother-in-law called me from her nursing home. I had said my goodbyes to her before my divorce, but in that time, I couldn't talk with her well. I hadn't contacted her since the last time, so I was surprised that she called. After talking about my father-in-law's advanced dementia, she updated me on my ex-husband's situation. "What? He broke up?" "Yes, that's the case. He's foolish, isn't he? Between us, he was dumped before the divorce was finalized." "I see. Seems like his relationship with that woman has already ended." "Well, that's expected, isn't it?" Any young girl would run if she had to deal with taking care of seniors. So who is at the home now? Donald. He ended up leaving his big corporate job, but he's trying with his complaints. He's such a fool. He was able to work because of his wife supporting him behind. He still doesn't talk about his own infidelity. Sophie, breaking up with him was the right thing to do. My ex-husband hasn't changed, but it seems like he's struggling a bit. I found myself a bit relieved by hearing that. My usually stern mother-in-law chuckled and said, "Sophie, thank you. I was planning to ask you to try again with him when I called, but your voice sounds so lively, so I decided not to ask." In the roughly 15 years we lived together, I'd never had such a long conversation like this with my mother-in-law. Our relationship wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. I listened to her voice. I assumed this would be the last time I'd hear from her, and I savored every word. "It turned out for the best," she said so sadly, and my tears welled up. "It's been a year since my divorce. Everything has been going well, and I've managed to make a fresh start. However, I've always felt a lingering sense of regret. It's because I felt that I had wasted 15 years of my life. But then, with this phone call, my mother-in-law said it, thank you, and that she had planned to ask me to try again with her son. There's no chance of getting back together with my ex-husband, but hearing that from his mother made me genuinely happy. It felt like a validation of what I had done for those 15 years. I will never forget this phone call from her. Those 15 years were not wasted because now I believe that so."
Next month, we're going back to live with my parents. My husband Ben told his sister-in-law Holly. To our surprise, she seemed really happy about it. But when moving day came, I got a ton of calls. After unpacking, I found out that Holly had given out the wrong address. I didn't get to hear the full story and felt really upset. My name's Jane, I'm 35, just an ordinary office worker. I live with my husband Ben and our 4th grade child. We both work hard to make ends meet and have a happy family life. Everything was going smoothly. Then Holly came to visit. At first, she said she just wanted to hang out, so we welcomed her warmly. But she started showing up unannounced every few days, acting more and more arrogant each time. Holly knew when I finished work and would time her visits accordingly, making herself at home and helping herself to our food and drinks. It got so bad that she even started eating our kids' snacks. I tried talking to her about it, but she wouldn't listen. Instead, she'd get mad and impossible to deal with. Lately, she's been coming over every single day, and Ben and I are worried sick about how to make her stop. "Hey, you didn't get anything today, even though you knew I was coming." I felt like sighing at her behavior. "I didn't buy anything. If you want to eat, you can get it yourself," I replied calmly. But as soon as I said that, Holly started yelling loudly, "Don't mess with me. I'm a guest. You should treat me. And this is your house, right? It's only fair for you to pay for everything," she shouted aggressively, thinking it would make me give in. She was really selfish and difficult to deal with. "Holly, we didn't get a call before you came. Isn't it common courtesy to let us know beforehand if you want to visit as a guest?" I said, noticing Holly's shoulders tense up, causing her to spill her tea. "How dare you? You're my sister-in-law. Is this how you treat family? I'll make sure everyone hears about this," she retorted angrily, despite being the one causing the inconvenience. Reflecting back, I remembered how different she was before. When I first met her at my in-laws' house, she and her husband Ken were so welcoming. They made me feel at ease, which helped me bond with my in-laws and eventually marry Ben. But now she seemed like a completely different person. When I tried to ask her if something had happened with her in-laws, she refused to talk about it. At first, I tried to be supportive, but as her unannounced visits and rude behavior continued, I grew frustrated. My attempts to distance myself only seemed to escalate her actions further. "I need a drink." "Go buy it." Now, Holly ordered me while I was busy cooking, almost pushing me out the door as if she wanted me gone. She threw my bag, which was in the living room, outside. Despite feeling frustrated and wanting to refuse, I grabbed my bag. But Holly blocked the doorway, refusing to let me back in until I got what she wanted. "Please stop this. My husband will be home soon, and our child will be back from their friend's house," I pleaded. but Holly remained unmoved. "I don't care. If you stop complaining and go now, you'll be back in time," she said firmly, blocking the entrance like a stubborn gatekeeper. Realizing arguing would be futile and only waste time, I reluctantly headed to the nearby supermarket to buy the alcohol Holly demanded. When I got back home, my kids had returned, and I found my sister-in-law, Holly, making my child clean up the tea she had spilled, acting all high and mighty. I quickly went to my child and shot a stern look at Holly. "Please, don't do this again. You spilled the tea, so you need to clean it up," I firmly told her. But instead of acknowledging her mistake, Holly just started drinking the wine she had taken from me, saying, "It's your fault for being so slow." I told my child to take their things to their room and rushed through the rest of the cleaning. As I cooked, my frustration grew, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to put a stop to Holly's unacceptable behavior. I talked to my husband, Ben, about Holly's behavior, and he was just as upset as I was, especially about what she did to our child. He said he'd call his brother right away to address the situation, but when he tried, he returned with a frown, saying the call wouldn't go through. We both looked at his phone, puzzled, wondering what could be causing the issue. Feeling disgusted by Holly's actions, we had been wanting to visit my in-laws, but finding a suitable day amidst our busy schedules was proving difficult. Despite our worries, we decided to plan a visit for next month and left it at that. The following day, I mentioned to Holly that we were planning to visit my in-laws, but she didn't seem interested in the details and strongly objected to our decision for some reason. Holly's yelling only added to our confusion. Why was she so adamant about us not going to my in-laws' house? As I pondered over this, I received more troubling news the next day. My mom called to inform me that my dad had fallen down the stairs and been injured, needing caregiving. Although it wasn't serious, my parents were clearly distressed. I offered to go home immediately, but my mom insisted that I prioritize my children and not worry about them. Both of my parents are over 65, still working senior jobs despite being retired to support themselves. With my dad now needing care, it would put extra strain on my mom, juggling caregiving and work. Their lives would undoubtedly be affected. I couldn't help but wonder what I could do to help them. With a heavy heart, I finished work for the day and headed home. That evening, Holly showed up at our house as usual after the kids got back from school, expecting dinner to be ready. It was a routine thing for her. I glanced at Holly with a bit of resentment. I had hoped to talk to Ben about my parents that night, but with Holly around, it seemed challenging. "Could we skip dinner tonight? I bought a cake," I suggested, offering her the cake instead. Holly frowned and shot me a glare. "What do you mean? You expect me to just eat cake? That's absurd. We have our own issues too. I'm sorry, but could you just take this and go home?" I asked, hoping she'd understand. Reluctantly, Holly eyed the cake. I tried telling her, "You don't have to eat it if you don't want to," but she ignored me and ended up eating it anyway before heading back home. After discussing with Ben, who had just returned home, we realized we couldn't afford to fully support my parents every month, but we still wanted to help. Ben suggested doing more overtime, but I didn't want to overburden him either. That's when we had a brilliant idea to solve both the issue with my brother's wife and my parents' situation. Ben agreed, and we immediately got to work. While Ben started packing our things, I called my parents, and he dialed Holly's number. "We're moving back to my parents' place next month. We won't be around when you visit," Ben told her over the phone. Holly seemed thrilled at the news. "Well, I should start getting ready too," she replied casually before hanging up. We were left wondering what she meant by that. "Oh well, never mind," we shrugged and ended the call. On moving day, as we began unpacking at my parents' house, we were bombarded with frantic calls from Holly. I quickly answered, trying to calm her down. When she finally composed herself, she blurted out, "Your new place is..." I was puzzled and interrupted her, saying, "Wait, it's my parents' home. We're moving back here, remember?" There was a sharp intake of breath from Holly on the other end of the line. "Parents' home? Ben mentioned it, so I thought you were moving here," she exclaimed, catching me off guard. I turned to Ben, who was playing with our child nearby, and asked if he had clarified that it was my parents' home. Before I could finish explaining, the call abruptly ended. Anyway, it's not a big deal, right? You also said, well, never mind. Holly retorted, signaling the misunderstanding. I'm sorry, Holly, but we didn't move to your parents' home. We've already finished moving, Ben tried to clarify, but Holly had already hung up on me while I was explaining. Frustrated, she started blaming me for the confusion. When I asked about her plans, Holly revealed something surprising. I thought you'd unload all the tedious house chores onto us when you moved in, she said, leaving me speechless. Ignoring her condescending tone, I explained why we made the decision to move. Your frequent visits were becoming overwhelming, Holly. Around the same time, my mom informed me that my dad had been injured and needed care. When Ben and I discussed it, we thought moving back to my parents' home would help keep you at bay and allow us to assist my mom. Holly's response was simply a threatening huh. My parents' home is conveniently located near our child's school and close to our workplaces, so the move went smoothly, like hitting two targets with one shot. We had planned to explain this to Holly, but she abruptly ended the call, so we didn't feel responsible for the misunderstanding. Come and move here immediately, Holly demanded, her voice rising, but I firmly declined. While living with Holly's family didn't sound bad, I couldn't bear the thought of being taken advantage of. Plus, my parents are going through a tough time right now. Despite my explanation, Holly refused to accept it. So, you won't listen to me? Suddenly, we heard Ben's brother's voice on the line. Holly gasped and stepped back. Is everything okay, Holly? I inquired, concerned. Holly pleaded urgently, please, just come over now. What's wrong? Hurry up. I wondered why my sister-in-law was so frantic. Holly's urgency left me speechless, and then she abruptly ended the call. After hanging up, I filled Ben in on my sister-in-law's urgent plea, and he grunted in response. Guess we better check it out, he said, offering to drive. Amidst the chaos of just having moved and dealing with various tasks, I quickly arranged for my parents to watch the kids while we visited my in-laws. Luckily, they were both home and agreed to help out, allowing Ben and me to go together. Upon reaching my in-laws' house, I rushed into the living room. There, I found Holly looking dejected, while my mother-in-law and brother-in-law appeared furious. They offered us tea and explained the situation as soon as they saw us. Holly ran away from home after we confronted her about her reckless spending. We've been trying to reach her, but she's been avoiding us, my brother-in-law explained, shooting a glare at Holly. I was stunned to hear this revelation. I hadn't realized Holly had left home. Ben shared my disbelief, giving Holly a questioning look. Apparently, Holly had even dipped into my savings. I had been trying to contact her to retrieve my money, but she had been unreachable. Today, she had suddenly returned home. Hearing about our move-in plans, they assumed it was a misunderstanding. Surprised? I instinctively shook my head. Then Holly, who had been quiet until now, spoke up defiantly. Mom, it's your fault for interfering in my life. I spent the money to ease your stress. It's not a big deal. She slammed her fist on the table, her face flushed. But neither my mother-in-law nor brother-in-law backed down. Stop making excuses. You quit your job suddenly and expected us to do all the housework and cooking. How can you claim to be stressed? Exactly. You spend all the money we earn on designer bags. It's unacceptable. They both raised their voices angrily, their faces red. Holly, showing no remorse, simply looked away, not taking the situation seriously. We had no clue about the turmoil brewing in my in-laws' home. My brother-in-law's voice rose sharply. Enough is enough. Are you also causing trouble for my younger brother? If you're so unhappy, let's just get divorced. Stay out of our lives. Holly's face drained of color, panic evident in her eyes. Wait. Why does it have to come to that? I was just trying to take care of you too, she pleaded. Ben and I exchanged a sigh. It was us who took care of you. You came over every day, ate and drank whatever you wanted from our home, even had dinner without contributing or lifting a finger to help. I interjected, earning a sharp glare from my brother-in-law. That's because it's your house. I'm a guest, so why should I pay? Holly spoke selfishly, leaving us speechless. My determined brother-in-law retrieved divorce papers. I've had enough, Holly. Sign these and leave. Stay away from this house and my younger brothers. Holly was taken aback by his resolve. And you need to repay Mom's savings in full. We'll settle it through a lawyer. Holly's shock was palpable, her face paling. I wonder how much she spent, I mused, noting her reaction. I don't have that kind of money, Jane. Both you and Ben are working, right? You must have some spare. Holly, flustered, turned to me for assistance. I shook my head, meeting her gaze. We simply can't afford it. We have our parents' healthcare expenses, our children's support payments, and our own living costs to consider. You'll have to find a solution on your own. I explained firmly, and finally, Holly accepted the reality and gave up. Following her brother-in-law's ultimatum, Holly was obligated to fully reimburse her mother-in-law's money. She enlisted a lawyer and had the arrangement officially documented to ensure accountability. Her brother-in-law informed us of this development and offered another apology, saying, "I'm sorry for getting you involved." We felt a sense of relief knowing that our concerns had been addressed. Interestingly, it appears that all the food and drink consumed by Holly at our house was also included in the mother-in-law's claim. While full repayment might be challenging due to the lack of detailed records, some restitution may be possible. My husband and I express our gratitude to my brother-in-law. It turns out that Holly had borrowed money to cover her expenses during her absence and is now struggling with that debt as well. Meanwhile, I've been dedicating my time to assisting my mom at my parents' home. With Holly no longer a source of concern, most of my stress has dissipated. Moving forward, I'm committed to working diligently to safeguard my cherished parents and family. My parents liked my twin sister more than me. They spent all the money they were saving for my wedding on her. So I stopped talking to them after saying no to my mom's selfish request. I'm 23 years old and have a twin sister named Allison. We don't get along. Actually, we don't even talk. The same goes for my parents. We used to talk, even though they didn't treat me well. But for the past 2 years, I've stayed away from them, and they haven't tried to contact me until now. Allison is 12 minutes older than me, so she's automatically the favorite because she's older. My parents only wanted one child because that's what they had planned for, and they couldn't afford to raise two. But when they found out they were having twins, it was too late to change their plans, and Mom didn't want to take any risks. I learned about this when I was in high school from my uncle, who was drunk at a Thanksgiving party. That was the day I gave up trying to make my parents like me. In those circumstances, they did the most typical thing. They had 2 children but chose to only love one, which happened to be Allison, not me. Since we were kids, the competition between me and Allison was intense. Whatever she did, I tried to do better just to get our parents' approval, but it only made them dislike me more for outshining their favorite. Honestly, Allison wasn't even that interested in being better than me. She just wanted people to praise her, so she pretended to care about our competition. I have to admit, she was skilled at manipulation, making people believe she was genuinely hurt when I outed her. This resulted in many people validating her and putting me down to make her feel better. These people included my parents, some relatives, and even some classmates from high school. So in the end, I got good grades and participated in many activities to outshine my sister, while she received attention, validation, and sympathy from my parents and others because I was seen as the bad guy for overshadowing her. Looking back, I wouldn't change my achievements, but I do wish I had rubbed them in her face more. Then 2 years ago, we turned 21 and had both graduated. She graduated from a regular college, while I graduated from one of the top business schools in the state. Not only that, I was the valedictorian and had received a scholarship, which saved my parents a lot of money on my education. You might think I'm crazy, but I actually hoped my parents would be happy for me. Instead, they focused all their attention on Allison and her uncertain future because she had barely passed her studies. Both of us had moved back home, but while I was already working as an intern from home, Allison was struggling to find a job and facing rejection after rejection. My parents were more concerned about her, barely acknowledging my achievements or congratulating me. I wasn't surprised, but I was definitely disappointed. I tried to hide my feelings because I was still living with them and hadn't saved enough to move out yet, so I kept quiet about how hurt I was. But after our 21st birthday, I couldn't take it anymore. I expected them to do something special for us. But the day before our birthday, I found out they had all gone to the beach with Allison and her friends, leaving me alone at home with just a note and a $50 gift card. I felt utterly shattered. They had taken Allison on a beach trip while I got nothing but a brief note and a small gift. Many things have been unfair in my childhood, but this was the last straw. It was so disappointing and heartless that I decided to move out that very day and never look back. I had a few friends who offered to let me stay with them until I could find my own place, which wouldn't take long because the company I was interning at was likely going to hire me after the internship. So I only needed a place to stay for a maximum of 2 months. I packed my things and moved in with a friend without telling my parents or sister, and I haven't looked back since. They didn't miss me enough to ask me to come back. They did call me the day after I moved out, but not to wish me a happy birthday. They wanted to inform me that they'd be back soon and mentioned that I should probably fix the leaky tap. I told them I had moved out, hoping for some kind of reaction, but there was none. My parents seemed fine with it, and Allison didn't care. That was the last meaningful conversation I had with my family. Since then, I haven't visited them, and they haven't reached out to me either. Occasionally, I'd hear about Allison from my friends, but that was the extent of my knowledge about her life. They were unaware of my parents, and my parents knew little about me. Over the past 2 years, I've worked hard and now have my own place. It's not extravagant, but it's a comfortable apartment in a good neighborhood. The rent is manageable with my income, which is quite an achievement considering the struggles many people my age face. I'm content with how my life has unfolded, and I've made a conscious effort to keep thoughts of my family at bay. I recently learned that Allison got married to a businessman much older than her and is now enjoying life in California. I thought everything was fine with my family until 2 days ago when my uncle called, informing me that my parents had been in a serious car accident and wanted to see me urgently. I hurried to the hospital as soon as I could because, despite everything, I'm not heartless. When I arrived, I learned that they had already been there for a couple of days, recovering from their injuries. Their car had been hit by a truck, and although they survived, they were seriously hurt. Unfortunately, they didn't have health insurance because my dad believed in self-sufficiency and thought we wouldn't need hospital care. It's one of the most absurd beliefs I've ever encountered. They had initially reached out to my sister, but she refused to come back or assist them. She felt it was inappropriate for our parents to ask for financial help from her wealthy husbands so soon after her wedding. She didn't want to appear like a gold digger to her spouse. She refused to return because she felt she couldn't abandon her home and her 2 stepchildren, who weren't biologically hers, but her husband's from a previous marriage. She was busy playing the role of a happy family with her husband's relatives, neglecting her own parents in the hospital after a severe car accident. Even as she wanted to help with the bills, she couldn't afford to, as she was solely dependent on her husband. It was a harsh reality check, shattering the illusion of being the favored daughter and the golden child. I was shocked that they hadn't even bothered to contact me first. When my uncle mentioned that my parents now expected me to cover their medical expenses, I was furious. The amount was substantial, and it would take me a long time to recover financially. I hesitated to spend so much, especially on people who had never shown me any love or care throughout my life. I knew they had other family members who could take care of them, and even if I didn't pay, someone else would step in. It's just that it would be more embarrassing for them to borrow money from others, and they'll likely have to repay it much sooner than they would have to repay me. They explained this while asking me to cover the bills and even promised a quick repayment. So I'm torn. I can either refuse to pay, saving myself from humiliation, or I can cover their expenses, sacrificing my own money and waiting for reimbursement. Honestly, I'm not inclined to help them at all. We haven't spoken in 2 years, and our relationship has been strained for as long as I can remember. They feel like strangers to me now, so I don't feel compelled to assist them. But then again, if I don't help, I'm no better than Allison, which is disheartening. So I'm unsure what to do. Update 1. Hi there, I've made the tough decision not to assist my parents. It wasn't easy, but I'm confident their medical expenses will be covered by other means. They only reached out to me because they were too proud to ask other relatives for help. I haven't informed them of my decision yet. How do you even begin to tell your family you won't be assisting with their medical bills after a serious accident? It's been nearly 5 days since I last saw them, and after reflecting on the comments, I realized I was still unconsciously competing with Allison. Seeing that she didn't offer assistance to our parents, I felt compelled to prove I was the better daughter. I suppose I'll always have that competitive streak, no matter how hard I try. It's become a part of who I am. Many comments rightfully criticized my parents' lack of health insurance, and I couldn't agree more. My father's decision to forego insurance, thinking he was a flawless driver, was incredibly foolish. If I had been involved in their lives, I would have insisted on insurance. He didn't even insure his car, which adds to the recklessness of his choices. They're fortunate that the accident was the truck driver's fault. Otherwise, they'd be responsible for covering the car repairs as well. As for their financial situation, which many of you inquired about, I'd say my parents are comfortable. They're neither wealthy nor struggling. My dad holds a managerial position in his company, and my mom works in HR at a smaller firm. Together, their income is sufficient, especially now that they no longer have to support me or Allison. While growing up, we never faced financial stress, but we also couldn't live extravagantly. We were solidly middle class, and that hasn't changed. I can't understand why my parents wouldn't be able to cover their own medical bills. If they can borrow money with the promise of repayment, they should be able to manage their expenses themselves. They haven't explained the reason to me, and I doubt I'll find out anytime soon. Update 2. I finally mustered the courage to inform my parents that I wouldn't be assisting with their expenses. They had been calling me persistently for the past week, and yesterday I realized I couldn't keep ignoring them until they were discharged from the hospital. So I answered their calls and explained my decision. As expected, they didn't react well. My mom unleashed her anger on me to spite her broken ribs, accusing me of being ungrateful, among other things. My dad simply disowned me and hung up after my mom finished berating me. Surprisingly, their reaction didn't hurt as much as I anticipated. I realized I hadn't felt loved by them in a long time. They hadn't made any effort to contact me or check on me for 2 years after I moved out following their neglect on an important birthday. So I've never really had parents anyway. I'll just continue living my life as I have been for the past 2 years, and even before that. Their reaction doesn't affect me as much as they thought it would. After the call with my parents, my uncle called to give me an earful, but I hung up after a few seconds because I didn't need that negativity from others. Whatever they think of me doesn't matter anymore. My uncle later texted me, informing me that my parents had decided to use the money from the fund they had set aside for our wedding, now that they were in need. They had already used more than half of the wedding fund for Allison's wedding, and whatever was left they spent on a trip to Europe. This left them with little savings, explaining why they couldn't cover their own expenses. So that mystery was solved. My uncle may have intended to make me feel guilty, but instead I felt relieved that I hadn't contributed my hard-earned money to my parents' bills. Their irresponsible spending was their own doing, not mine. Their lack of insurance due to their delusional beliefs wasn't my responsibility either. They could turn to their relatives for help or fend for themselves. I wasn't giving them anything. They were no longer entitled to my time or my money. Update 3. Something really strange happened today, and I need to talk about it. I haven't been able to confide in my friends because most of them don't know much about my family history, and I'm not ready to share it with them yet. So I'm turning to Reddit for support. It's been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. A few hours ago in the evening, Allison unexpectedly showed up at my doorstep. I was taken aback by her sudden visit, especially because I didn't think she knew where I lived. It turns out one of our old high school friends disclosed the neighborhood I lived in, and Allison went to great lengths to locate me, which was surprising given our strained relationship. She also looks and acts very differently from what I remembered. She's become more refined and sophisticated, I think, and that's been a huge difference because earlier she used to talk like she was still in high school. But now she sounds more laddie-like somehow and even behaves better. Her way of dressing has changed, the jewelry she wears has changed, and even her makeup. It actually felt like I wasn't even talking to Allison today. Everything about her is aged all of a sudden, but one thing that hasn't changed is how she is a person. I guess you cannot put makeup on your heart and tell people to call it Mrs. Davis, like she did with herself. Her personality and beliefs haven't undergone any renovation for sure. I let her in after she knocked at my door, and I was really surprised to see her, but I was also curious to know why she'd come by, so I decided to talk to her. After some small talk about her life, where she told me everything that she'd been up to unprompted and bragged about how fabulous her life was as a stay-at-home mom of 2 toddlers married to a wealthy guy without anything to worry about except for her cuticles. I waited for her to get to the point while politely nodding at her boring speech about how wonderfully underrated being a traditional housewife was. She was even advising me to do the same, so I really couldn't wait for her to finish talking about irrelevant things and get to the damn point, which she did after about 15 minutes of talking about her life. She explained that she had returned on her own initiative because our parents had been pleading for her to visit them after the accident. They didn't ask for her financial assistance, but simply wanted her presence. After 2 weeks, she finally decided to come back and thought it was also an opportunity to reconcile with me. However, things took a turn when she began venting about our parents' neediness and how they were disrespecting her new family. She complained about having to leave her 2 children with their nanny just to visit them, expressing frustration at being forced to choose between her parents and her own kids. I couldn't comprehend why she kept referring to her stepchildren as her own. She divulged a lot about her marriage and her husband, unsolicited. From what I gathered, it seemed like her husband had only married her to improve his chances of gaining partial custody of his children, which he successfully achieved. She believed he genuinely cared for her. He had been embroiled in a custody battle for some time, being a busy businessman unable to dedicate enough time to his children. His ex-wife used this against him until he announced his engagement, signaling stability, which swayed the court in his favor. Allison proudly recounted how she had stepped in to save these children, but to me, it seemed like her husband had manipulated her. Their relationship had barely lasted a year before he proposed, indicating that his motives might not have been purely romantic. It's unlikely that genuine love blossoms so quickly, especially after a divorce. Perhaps Allison was oblivious to this or chose to overlook it for financial security, content with being a glorified nanny to her husband's children. Furthermore, she resented her own parents for expecting her presence after their serious accident, feeling it encroached on her time with her new family. Her new family, however, comprised a husband who may not have held much affection for her and 2 unrelated children who were just as content with their nanny as they were with her. If there ever was a picture-perfect definition of ungratefulness, it would be embodied by Allison. Though I'm no champion of my parents, hearing her complain about their alleged neediness left me astounded. It was hard to believe that this was the same girl they had favored repeatedly over me. Eventually, she got to the purpose of her visit and informed me she would depart in 2 days. Despite promising our parents she would stay for a month, she felt exhausted from their repetitive recounting of the accident and their ordeal, claiming she needed to return home soon. Now, she expected me to reconcile with our parents and essentially take her place, relieving her of the guilt of abandoning them in their time of need. Unaware that our parents had severed ties with me once again due to my refusal to cover their expenses, she likely assumed they hadn't mentioned it to her, as they rarely talk about me. She sought sympathy from me for having to deal with our parents and leaving her own family behind. Her plan was to leverage this sympathy to manipulate me into becoming our parents' emotional support, as she didn't feel capable of fulfilling that role herself. It was a classic tactic of Allison's, but I saw through it and refused to play along. I had no intention of revealing this to her during her stay at my house, knowing it would lead to conflict. Instead, I gave her a vague assurance that I would try to reconcile, though I knew I had no intention of doing so. She left after urging me to stay in touch, though we both knew she didn't mean it. Frankly, I was relieved to see her go. Not only was she a self-centered and manipulative individual, but she was also dreadfully dull to converse with. Her monotonous tales of life in California left little room for meaningful dialogue. Her life seems to revolve around parties, her stepchildren, and her husband. While she believes she's living the dream, I find it rather pitiful. It's evident that her husband's affection is lacking, and with her stepchildren spending significant time with their biological mother, it's likely they'll always favor her. Yet this is the path she has chosen, and as for me, I'm determined to create a life far removed from my family. Today reaffirmed my decision to distance myself from my parents and sister. They're selfish and callous, with little regard for anyone but themselves, especially Allison. It's disheartening to be associated with such individuals. However, I finally cut ties with all of them, blocking their contacts to ensure my peace of mind. I hope they respect my boundaries and refrain from contacting me in the future. I'm better off without them, and I pray it stays that way.